We have been dead for the first few minutes of this program. So for those of you who patiently stuck around, I am Coach Tony. Welcome to Hey Coach Tony on ESPN Radio. It is Saturday, April 9th. Each Saturday on Hey Coach Tony, we are going to be discussing the most pressing issues in youth sports. And as always, I'll be taking your calls on our toll-free studio lines at 855-HEY-COACH. That's 855-439-2622. Now, this week I want to talk about communication between parents and coaches because, let's face it, with all the conflicts and fistfights and even murders that occur in youth sports, most of them boil down to the same old thing. How effectively can we communicate as parents and coaches? When these communications break down, that's really when the problems start. I got a bunch of emails during the week on this topic through my blog. The blog, by the way, is www.heycoachtony.com. But I want to hear from you guys this morning. I want to hear some of your stories about interactions between parents and coaches. Let me know what works. Let me know what doesn't work. So we've opened up the studio lines at 855-HEY-COACH. But before we get to your calls and your emails, there has indeed been some breaking news on a topic that I've discussed many times before on the show, and that is the use of illegal substances in sports. Just yesterday, unless you live in a cave, you probably heard that Manny Ramirez announced his retirement from baseball. Now, this is after he was caught using performance-enhancing drugs, not for the first time, but for the second time. And you know what? I'm really wondering what impact this is having on our kids. Because think about it. When we were kids, there were no steroids in sports. You know, occasionally you might hear a story about a guy who got caught with some cocaine or some marijuana, and they pretty much went to jail, and that was the end of it. I really don't have a reference point as it pertains to our kids and what they really think about the severity of this situation. Well, anyway, I'm sure there are more than a few of you who want to chime in on this whole Manny Ramirez thing. I mean, listen, he was never really what I would consider a role model to begin with, but at this point, the question I think that's flying around is this guy ever going to really make it into the Hall of Fame? I mean, one of the most prolific hitters in baseball history, and you know, I got to tell you, I'm not sure what this does to his legacy, so I'm curious what you think. Throughout the show, I'll take your calls on this whole Manny thing, and we'll see if this truly taints his legacy, or if, you know, perhaps he's going to skate right on through to the Hall of Fame because of how lenient and forgiving we've all become based on these issues of substance abuse. So again, toll-free studio lines are open at 855-HEY-COACH, and we'll see if we can juggle between these two topics. But here's how I want to start things off this morning. During the week, as I mentioned, I got a bunch of emails from parents and coaches alike, all about communication between parents and coaches. It didn't take too long for this research exercise to turn into nothing more than an online gripe session. Parents were emailing about what's wrong with coaches, and the coaches were emailing me complaining about the parents. Anyway, rather than try to solve any of it over an email, I basically compiled a list of the main complaints that I received during the week that parents have for coaches and vice versa. And a little later on in the show, I'll simply go through that list. But for now, I want to start by talking a little bit about the actual communication between parents and coaches. You know, one thing I always try to ask parents and coaches whenever I do a workshop or a seminar is, can you guess why there's so much friction and so much conflict whenever parents and coaches try to communicate? Well, I'm curious to get some of your thoughts on that, but let me start by saying it's primarily because not of what we say or even really how we say it, but when we say it. We tend to try to talk with a coach or a parent when we're at our most emotional state. And when exactly is that? You guessed it, right after the game. At first blush, this might make sense. If you simply lived in a neat little box, this might make sense. You think about it for a second. Most of us are instinctual about this type of thing. So when something's bothering us, what do? We want to discuss it immediately while it's fresh in our heads. Again, seems to make sense, but let's examine for a second why this is the worst possible thing you can do when you're addressing a coach, especially when you're addressing a coach with a concern. Now, first off, as I've stated, if you're in an emotional state or even a state of anger, let's make a list of all the potential positive outcomes of an interaction between a parent and coach when at least one of you is angry. Ready? Go. Exactly. Nothing good can come from that interaction when someone is in an emotional and angry state. Nothing at all. But I think it's important to note that there's more to it than that. And bear with me, because whenever I do this one in front of an audience, the first reaction is really never good. Because I liken the relationship between parent and coach to the relationship between a husband and a wife. You see, here's where I usually start getting strange looks from people in the crowd. But hear me out, because this has nothing at all to do with who is the better gender or anything like that. Here's the scenario. If you're a guy and you just came home from work, regardless of what you do or how long your commute is or how much money you make, when your work day is over, what is the last thing in the world that you want to talk about? Yeah, I can hear you people screaming through the radio. The last thing you want to talk about is your day, right? In all my years of doing these seminars and the show, once I've had only one guy tell me, and I'll quote, I don't know what you're talking about. I love talking about my day with my wife as soon as I come home. Now that obviously threw me for a loop, but with the exception of that absolute freak, let's agree that the last thing we want to talk about when we get home is our day. Agreed? Good. So you don't want to talk about your day. What is the very first thing that your wife is going to ask you when you walk through the door? Exactly. How was your day? And if you had a bad day, you think you just say, hey, didn't have a great day. You think you can walk away. But what does she say after that? Tell me about it. Tell me about it. Let's keep talking about it, because you know what? It's going to make you feel better. Well, guess what, ladies? That don't work. It doesn't make us feel better. We want to escape the day. Now, I'm drawing this parallel, but hopefully you can see, how poorly is this discussion between that husband and wife going to go from that point forward, right? This is usually the time where the husband grabs a beer and a paper and tries to hide in another room, preferably one with a lock on the door. Anyway, Coach Tony, why do you tell us this great gripping story? Well, I'll tell you why. Because when a game or a practice is over, guess what? The coach's day of work is over. And he or she, doesn't matter which gender, he or she finally gets a chance to take a breath. So imagine now you, as the parent, you're the wife in this equation. You come up to the coach and you not only say, how was your day? It's usually something more like, hey, coach, I noticed you just had a really crappy day. So let me explain to you why it was crappy and what you did to make it so crappy. And then I'm going to tell you how to do it right. Can you imagine getting that kind of welcome when you walk through the door after a day of work? Well, anyway, I hope that shines a little light on why you should never address a coach right before or after a game. But let's assume you do have something important to discuss with the coach. I'm not saying never talk to the coach, even though some coaches would love that. I do think communication is important. So when we come back from break, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But before we go to break, folks, I don't know if you ever had to play an administrative role for your kids' team or their league, but let me tell you, sportssignup.com makes the process of registering players, coaches, volunteers, teams, leagues, tournaments, whatever, makes that whole process quick and efficient with a system that's easy to learn and easy to use. You got to go check them out at www.sportssignup.com. Make sure you got the two S's there in the middle, sportssignup.com. Now, my hometowns, we've been using sportssignup.com for years, and it took the hassle out of all the administrative nightmares that we used to have to deal with. What's really cool is Sports Signup also performs comprehensive background checks on coaches and volunteers using Kid Safe Plus, which uses an extensive criminal background database. So to make sure your kids are safe, visit them at www.sportssignup.com and request a free test account. That's right, I said it, completely free. There is no better way for you to find out if you like this system than to try it out for yourself. No contracts to sign, no setup fees, no minimum usage fees. Just use the reference code HeyTony, all caps and one word, HeyTony, so they know how you heard about him. You're listening to Hey Coach Tony on ESPN Radio. Stick around, folks. We'll be right back.